Hey guys, what's going on? Andrew coming at you, and I thought it would be fun to talk about 7 differences between teaching in Sweden versus teaching in the US, and the differences between the school systems here in Sweden and in the US. This is based on my experience of being a teacher here in Sweden and also teaching in the United States, and just being in both countries and being back and forth. There's a lot of differences. I'm not going to be able to get everything in this video, but I'm going to try to talk about 7 here that I think are important. Number 1 has to be the difference in Sweden's relationship with hierarchy in general. See, it's a much more level playing field with teachers and students here in Sweden, meaning that teachers don't have such a massive high authority, and I think that has a lot to do with just authority in Sweden in general. If you work in any workplace in Sweden, it's not like the boss has all this power over everybody else like you see in the American system. There's a lot more discussions. It's much more important that people agree on things. It's the same in the Swedish system, that think people agree on things. So I'm not saying that a teacher doesn't have authority. I feel like you can. I just mean it's a different kind of authority. Maybe they like something, they don't like something about the class, something they think that can be improved, where maybe you wouldn't hear that as much in an American school. But with that said, sometimes it's nice to have someone in charge that just makes the decisions. I think in American workplaces, where a lot of times it can be well, whose responsibility is for this or that. I bring that up because I think that comes back to how it is more in the Swedish society, and you can see how it reflects back in schools. It's just a different relationship with authority and how Swedes feel and see authority. So I just think it's interesting. And going off of number 2, based on what I just said, it's not that common unless you go to a specific school. I've taught at schools where teachers are called by Mr. So-and-so. I would be called Mr. Austin, for example. But I've been at schools where I've been called Andrew. And this goes back to number 1, that it's more of a level playing field a lot of times in Swedish schools. It's much more common for a teacher to be called by their first name. Now, in the American and British system, you call somebody Mr. or Miss because it's based on respect. But it also depends where you are in the U.S., because I've been in inner city schools in the U.S. where if someone said, hey, mister, like that was the ultimate sign of respect. Even though they wouldn't say my whole name, just that they were saying mister showed that they respected me. So it's just something that we have in our system, and it goes back to number 1. It's definitely connected to that. Number 3 has to be the grading system here in Sweden has A, B, C, D, and E, and F. So it's interesting, and you always have to make an adjustment if you're either a student or a foreign teacher or someone that's moved to Sweden, that's a kid that's learning the system. It's definitely a system that takes a little bit of time to get the hang of, just based on the different grading criteria. And going off of the different grading system, I will say that US grading systems a lot of time is only based on performance a lot of the time. Or a lot of my grades were like that. Or if I was in college, sometimes I would have an attendance grade on top of it. Not that it was much. It'd be 5% if I did attendance or something. But most of my grades would be 80% of the grade was my test, maybe 20% was quizzes or homework or something like that, and you got to calculate it, and if I was at 93%, that was an A. Where in the Swedish system, it's a lot about demonstrating the knowledge about something. If you've showed this knowledge at this type of level, where like I said, the U.S. system is based off of performance. Hey, you got 9 out of 10 right. U.S. and A was either 93% and above or 90% and above. Swedish system, it has to do with, you showed this knowledge one time. It doesn't necessarily have to be on a test that people showed this knowledge. It doesn't necessarily mean that you could do bad on a test, for example, and then get the option to retest and then show that knowledge later on. So there's a lot more, I guess. It's a different situation in the grading system. In the U.S. system, like I said, it's mostly based on performance. So it's interesting because in America, you don't get more than one shot a lot of times. I'm not saying that you do in Sweden in college or university at all, but I remember being in the States and I took a final, or I took a midterm once on a class that I should have studied harder for it. I didn't. I took the test, and I failed, basically. And then I went to every single class, and then I got an A, and I got a C for the class, because I only got 2 chances to take a test. It was a big life learning lesson for me, though. I will tell you that. Number 5 has to be the national testing grading. I wanted to say the similarities that both schools have their own version of national tests. In the States, we have a lot of standardized testing, which is not, I would say standardized testing is not very well liked in the States. Where I guess the difference would be, it's really just a straight up standard test, but it is graded by a separate party, and we have a lot of different tests you take throughout your time. It's take the SATs, for example, and these are things that you take to get a score to try to get into university. In Sweden, they have national tests. I guess one of the differences, instead of it being mailed out and somebody like checking the test, national tests are graded at the school by the teachers. So that's one thing I think is interesting, where it's not like a national graded test by some authority or something. A lot of our tests in the US, I said like that, are graded by some independent authority. Number 6 has to be mentorships. You know, it's very common in Sweden for someone to have a class, and the class will have a certain name. It'll have a number and a letter attached to it, and that'll be the name of the class or some type of class. And a lot of people are in the same class from 7th grade up to year 9. Some schools I've been at could be maybe from 1st grade up until year 9, or from year 4 up until year 9, until these students go on to what's called gymnasium, which is our version of high school. And these mentor classes means all the same kids go to all the same classes together. They have a teacher that's responsible to look after them, to help mentor them, to have meetings with the parents to discuss the kid's education with the kid and the parents that they have, I believe by law, twice a year at the least that you can have. And it's just a different system, because I like it. I think that there's a lot of pros that comes to the mentor system, and there's a big benefit of the kids being able to have the same friends for super long. But it's interesting because if you come from the U.S. system, we switch classes a lot. So even when I was in high school and middle school, I barely had classes with the same people. And that, I guess, made it so I didn't make the same friends in every single class and get that same amount of comfortability. But I also made a lot of friends because I had so many different groups of people that I was around constantly, that there's a pro that comes with that as well. I didn't have anybody that overlooked me. I think that comes from the U.S. Wild West mentality. Everybody's supposed to take care of themselves. And that's kind of what we had in the U.S. system. It's very independent based, like you're responsible for you. That's what I would say for sure. Just different. But when I was in university, I did have a mentor in college that was supposed to help advise me on some classes to take. So it is used sometimes in the U.S. system. Number 7 has to be another major difference I've seen from schools, is that sports are not connected with the school like they are in the United States. In Sweden, you can do some sports stuff in school as far as idrott and stuff goes, but you have to pay, and you go to soccer outside of school, or football outside of school, or hockey outside of school, or track and field. All of these are kind of like hobbies outside of school, including band. If you take band in school, you do learn how to play the instruments, but you don't have like orchestra and band like we have in the States. And this is just something that they have in Sweden, and it's always interesting because I talk about this one. This is the one thing that I wish Swedish schools had, because I think that it's really nice having that connection between school and education. You know, I would think there's a lot of people in the States that'll tell you that having sports connected with school saved their lives, because maybe they grew up in a really bad area and there's so many things around them that are terrible they can get in trouble with. Like, you know, living in an inner city, there's a lot of things that can take young people down, and them having to keep their grades up to be able to be on the sports team, keeping their behavior good, and the coach taking an interest in seeing, it's not just that a coach's job in a football team, for example, is not just to make sure they win football games, but they're also supposed to make sure that these students are doing what they need to in school, and also mentoring them there. So I guess in a sense, the way our mentorships kind of work in the States is a connection between teachers and coaches. I would say coaches end up probably being a big mentor when it comes to that. And I think that would be something nice to have in Sweden, because although I do think that a lot of these things you can do, like band and sports, there might be like government subsidies, so it doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money to do. There might be some kids who maybe they're in a bad financial situation, they can't afford it, or their parents can't afford it, and having it connected to school, it's just nice to have that carrot to dangle out in front of the kids to be good. And I know some people say, no, kids just need to be good somewhere. They shouldn't have the pressure of school on top of that. I would say a lot of the cases where we used it in the United States, it wasn't necessarily just because it wouldn't be because a kid had some kind of learning issue that was medical or something. This had to do with like attendance or working harder, needing help studying and things like that. And if you didn't do those things, you weren't going to be able to play in the game. But these were that were drastic measures that would be taken. Or if someone did something wrong, or if they misbehaved in school, they might get suspended from a game or from the team. So it was important to have these things in place, I think. Sweden doesn't do it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just something that I find interesting. This is a bonus one because I think I technically said 7. But one thing I do like in Sweden is to be able to pass idrott, or just in general, you have to be able to swim in Sweden. Sweden has so many lakes, and you'll notice if you ever swim at one of these lakes, you won't see most of the time you won't see like a lifeguard like overseeing everything, and that's because in Sweden, to be able to pass idrott, it is super critical important to learn how to swim. And I just love that they've incorporated that into the education system, because think about how many lives can get saved over time from just people being educated to learn how to swim. And not just that, but you learn other life-saving skills and whatnot. If you live in Sweden, you got to know, like, if you're breaking through ice, you got to have these little ice pick things that can get yourself out of the ice. So they learn a lot about these different emergency situations, dealing with the water, or ice skiing, ice fishing, ice skiing, or skating, ice skating in general, all these things that can happen. They get this education. Where in the States, we do learn how to swim in a lot of cases, but it's not something that I think is mandatory at a lot of schools, and it really should be, because it would save lives. But again, we probably have a lot of people that can't swim, and they would have to learn how to swim, and it would probably save lives over time, and it's something very important to learn. I mean, I would think that learning how to swim is a life skill and could come in handy and could save your life, because yeah, that one's an important one. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If I missed any, please go ahead and let me know in the comments below. I hope you really enjoyed this content, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hej då!